Mark Reynolds had finally done it. After years of renting cramped apartments and living paycheck to paycheck, he had saved enough to buy his first home. A charming 2-story house, nestled in the quiet, tree-lined streets of Maplewood Heights. It was perfect. The kind of place where neighbors smiled at each other during morning jogs and kids played safely until dusk. He could almost see himself planting a vegetable garden, painting the porch, and hosting summer barbecues. For Mark, this was the dream. The deal had gone smoothly, the inspection was clean, and the closing papers were signed without a hitch. Or so he thought. 2 weeks after moving in, as he was trimming the hedges along his newly planted flower bed, the mail carrier dropped a thick envelope in his mailbox. The return address caught his eye immediately. Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association. Mark frowned. He'd never heard of this group before. When he opened the letter, his heart sank. Dear homeowner, the letter began, "It has come to our attention that recent modifications to your property violate the community guidelines established by the Maplewood Heights HOA. Specifically, your garden installation does not comply with the approved landscaping standards. You are hereby required to remove the unauthorized features within 14 days or face penalties, including daily fines." Mark blinked, rereading the words as if they might change. "Wait a minute," he muttered. "I'm not even a member of this HOA. I never signed anything." His mind raced back to the closing documents. There had been dozens of pages, some filled with legal jargon he barely understood. Surely, he would have remembered something about an HOA. He grabbed his laptop and scoured every document, but there was no clear mention of any mandatory membership or fees. Just a few references to neighborhood guidelines and community standards that sounded optional at best. But the letter was real, and the threat was clear. The next day, Mark called the HOA's contact number listed at the bottom of the letter. A calm but firm woman answered, identifying herself as the HOA manager. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, "our community guidelines apply to all homeowners within Maplewood Heights. Whether or not they attend meetings or participate in the HOA, the rules are in place to maintain property values and neighborhood harmony." "But I never agreed to this," Mark argued. "I bought the house. I own it. How can you tell me what I can or can't do on my own property?" There was a pause. Then the manager's voice lowered slightly. "The guidelines are recorded with the county property records. They are binding." Mark felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Could it be true? Had he bought a house only to discover it came with invisible strings attached? Determined to find answers, Mark decided to attend the next HOA board meeting. Maybe face-to-face he could get some clarity. But as he walked up to the community center that evening, he noticed something odd. Groups of homeowners whispered behind their hands. Board members greeted each other with tight smiles. The air felt thick with tension, as if Mark was stepping into a room where he wasn't welcome. Inside, the board president, a sharp-eyed woman named Linda, called the meeting to order. When it was Mark's turn to speak, he stood up, holding the letter tightly. "I'm the owner of 15 Maplewood Lane," he said firmly. "I never signed up for the HOA or agreed to its rules. Yet I'm being told I have to remove parts of my garden. How is this fair? Who actually controls this neighborhood?" Linda's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Reynolds," she replied smoothly. "The HOA's authority is established through the covenants recorded with the county. These covenants apply to every homeowner, regardless of participation. It's about protecting our community's standards." Mark looked around the room. Some neighbors nodded. Others avoided his gaze. The realization hit him hard. This wasn't just a friendly neighborhood group. It was a powerful force, controlling every inch of his property. As the meeting ended, Mark felt the first real tremors of a battle he hadn't expected. This was no longer just about a garden. It was about ownership, rights, and an invisible chain wrapped around his dream home. And Mark wasn't going down without a fight. The evening air was thick with tension as Mark stepped out of the community center. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows on the pavement. His heart was pounding, not from anger, but from something more unsettling. Unease. He had faced the HOA board, but something about the encounter didn't sit right. Over the next few days, Mark replayed the meeting in his mind. The calm confidence of Linda, the board president, the way the other members had exchanged glances when he spoke, and the neighbors. Some looked sympathetic, but many kept their distance, their smiles polite but cold. Why was the HOA so determined to enforce rules he had never agreed to? And why did the whole neighborhood seem complicit? One morning, as Mark was heading out to work, he noticed a group of men gathered near the entrance to the community park. They wore matching jackets with the HOA logo. His curiosity got the better of him, and he approached. "Hey, what's going on?" he asked. One of the men, tall and broad-shouldered, turned to him with a guarded look. "We're doing a patrol," he said. "Checking for violations, unapproved structures, landscaping, anything that doesn't comply with the guidelines." Mark frowned. "A patrol? For what?" "To keep the neighborhood looking nice," the man said. "It's our job." Mark's blood ran cold. Patrols? Enforcement? He had thought the HOA was just a club that handled community events and fees, not a neighborhood police force. That evening, Mark's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Be careful what you're digging into. Not everyone here wants the truth out." The warning sent a chill down Mark's spine. Determined to understand the HOA's power, Mark returned to the documents he had been studying. Late into the night, he pored over the deed, the community covenants, and state property laws. The more he read, the more complicated it became. The HOA's authority was buried deep in the property records, enforceable by law, but only if properly recorded and disclosed. But had it been disclosed to him? The sellers never mentioned the HOA, and the real estate agent had been tight-lipped. The next day, Mark tried to get answers from the agent who sold him the house. The agent's cheerful facade faded when Mark brought up the HOA letter. "Look, Mark," the agent said hurriedly. "There are some complicated things with this neighborhood. The HOA's been around a long time. Most people just go along with it because it keeps the place looking good. It's standard procedure. But I wasn't told about patrols or fines." Mark pressed. "This feels like a trap." The agent shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "Sometimes, it's easier to just comply." That night, Mark's phone rang. The number was blocked. A voice whispered, "You don't know what you're up against. They control everything. Utilities, landscaping, even who can park where. You think this is about a garden? Think again." The call ended abruptly, leaving Mark with more questions than answers. Over the next week, Mark noticed strange things. Flyers about HOA meetings appeared on his doorstep. His mailbox was rifled. Through, a neighbor he had spoken to at the meeting avoided him now, crossing the street to keep distance. Mark felt surrounded, watched. The HOA wasn't just a governing body. It was an unseen force, shaping every aspect of life in Maplewood Heights. Determined not to back down, Mark began documenting everything: letters, encounters, even the suspicious phone calls. He reached out to a few neighbors who quietly admitted they felt trapped by the HOA's rules, but were too afraid to speak up. The question weighed on him heavier every day. Was he alone in this fight, or was there a way to break free from the HOA's grip? Then, During a routine walk, Mark stumbled upon a flyer tucked under a park bench. It wasn't from the HOA. It was a call to a secret meeting. For those who want to challenge the HOA's control, Mark's heart raced. Was this the spark he needed to turn the tide? Or was it a trap set to lure him deeper into the conflict? One thing was clear. Mark's quiet life in Maplewood Heights was about to change forever. Mark sat at his kitchen table, the glow from his laptop screen, casting sharp shadows across his determined face. The flyer he'd found the night before nagged at his thoughts. A secret meeting for homeowners who wanted to push back against the HOA. But before he could decide whether to attend, he had one urgent task: to understand exactly what he'd agreed to when he bought his house. He reopened the digital files from the closing, deeds, covenants, and restrictions that felt like a maze of legal jargon. Mark's eyes scanned the pages, looking for anything that mentioned the HOA's authority over his property. Hours passed. His fingers hovered over the mouse, clicking and scrolling through dozens of documents. Then, buried on page 57 of the county property records, his breath caught. A clause, written in dense legalese, stood out. All properties within the Maplewood Heights subdivision are subject to the conditions, covenants, and restrictions, CC&Rs, established by the Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association, Inc. These CC&Rs shall run with the land and be binding upon all current and future owners, regardless of membership or consent. Mark leaned back, heart pounding. Binding. Even without consent, he muttered. The phrase, run with the land, implied that the HOA's rules weren't optional. They were permanently tied to the property title. This wasn't just a neighborhood group with friendly guidelines. This was a legal chain wrapped around his house, invisible until now. His mind raced. How could the sellers have not told him about this? How had his real estate agent glossed over it? Had they all been complicit in hiding this from him? Mark's phone buzzed again. Another anonymous text. You're digging too deep. Be careful what you reveal. The tension twisted tighter around him. Determined to get to the bottom of this, Mark called the county records office the next morning. After wading through several automated menus, he reached a clerk. Hi, I'm researching property documents for 15 Maplewood Lane, Mark said carefully. Can you help me understand what it means that CC&Rs run with the land? The clerk explained. It means the restrictions are recorded with the property deed and are legally enforceable against any owner, even if they don't sign a contract or join the HOA. Basically, if you own the property, you agree to follow those rules whether you like it or not. Mark felt a chill. So, even if I never signed anything, the HOA can tell me what to do with my yard, what I can build or paint, he asked. Unfortunately, yes, the clerk said. It's common in planned communities. The goal is to keep the neighborhood consistent, but it can feel very restrictive. Mark hung up, his mind spinning with the weight of this hidden truth. He thought back to Linda, the HOA president, and the board members' cold eyes at the meeting. They hadn't just been enforcing arbitrary rules. They were enforcing a legal framework buried so deep most owners didn't know it existed. That night, Mark's anxiety grew as he pored over the CC&Rs. Some rules seemed reasonable. No unsightly trash piles. Keeping lawns trimmed. But others were bizarrely strict. Paint colors restricted to a narrow palette. Fences limited to certain styles. Even prohibitions against certain plants and decorations. One rule in particular stood out. No alterations to exterior landscaping. Without prior approval from the HOA board, Mark's garden, the one that triggered the letter, clearly violated this. Yet, he had never been asked for approval. Suddenly, it all felt like a trap. The HOA wasn't just protecting property values. It was controlling every inch of life here. What you could plant, paint, even display. Late that night, Mark's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Cautiously, he peered through the peephole, but saw no one. Just a small envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, "Beware the rules you don't see. The HOA's power is more than paperwork. It's control. Meet us at the community center, 8 p.m. This is your last chance to understand." His heart thudded. Was this an invitation or a warning? Mark knew one thing for sure. Whatever lay ahead, this fight was no longer just about a garden. It was about uncovering the truth behind a hidden system designed to control him and every homeowner in Maplewood Heights. The next move was his. Mark stood outside the community center just before 8 p.m., the cold spring air sharp against his skin. The note's cryptic message echoed in his mind. This is your last chance to understand. His heart beat faster as the heavy doors creaked open and he stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, filled with a handful of people huddled in corners, whispering anxiously. None looked like the friendly faces he'd seen at the HOA meetings. These were neighbors, but different, wary, almost scared. A middle-aged woman with steely eyes stepped forward. "I'm Sarah," she said quietly. "You're Mark, right? We've heard about your stand against the HOA." Mark nodded, eyes scanning the room. "Who are you all? What's going on?" Sarah took a breath. "We're a small group who've been fighting the HOA's grip for years. Most people don't realize just how deep their control runs. They use intimidation, fines, and social pressure to keep everyone in line." Mark's stomach tightened. "But why? What do they get out of it?" Sarah glanced over her shoulder before answering. "Power, money, control. The HOA isn't just about property values. They've been quietly making deals behind the scenes, selling off rights to developers and businesses without telling homeowners." Mark swallowed hard. The pieces were starting to fit into a darker puzzle. "Why don't more people speak up?" he asked. "Fear," Sarah said bluntly. "We've seen neighbors ostracized, threatened with legal action, even some who mysteriously move away. The HOA has its fingers in everything, from who parks where to what kind of decorations you can have. Most just accept it because fighting back feels impossible." A man near the back, his voice low and urgent, added, "And the board's cozy, with local officials. Complaints disappear. Lawsuits drag on forever. They want to wear people down." Mark felt the weight of isolation pressing down on him. His battle wasn't just against a group of rules. It was against an entrenched system, designed to crush dissent. Yet amid the fear, a flicker of hope glimmered. Here were people willing to stand up, to fight back. Sarah pulled out a folder, thick with documents. "We've collected evidence, records, emails, even some secret meeting notes. But we need more. That's why your case matters." Mark nodded slowly, resolve hardening. "I want in. I want to help." But the room shifted uncomfortably. A young woman in the corner raised her hand hesitantly. "I don't know if this is wise," she said softly. "I lost my job after speaking out. I had to move just to escape the harassment. The HOA doesn't just threaten property, they ruin lives." Mark's gaze locked with hers, a mixture of sympathy and determination. "I get that," he said. "But if we don't stand up now, nothing will change." The group murmured in agreement, but the fear was palpable. Later, as the meeting broke up, Sarah pulled Mark aside. "You need to be careful," she warned. "The HOA watches everyone closely. They'll try to discredit you, turn neighbors against you." Mark clenched his fists. "I expected as much." Walking home, Mark noticed the neighborhood's usual quiet seemed different. Eyes followed him from behind curtains. Whispered conversations stopped as he passed. The sense of being watched grew heavier. At his doorstep, Mark found a folded note slipped under the mat. It read simply, "Stop asking questions, or you'll regret it." His blood ran cold. But instead of fear, a fire ignited within him. This was bigger than a garden dispute. This was about taking back control. Not just for himself, but for everyone trapped in Maplewood Heights. Mark realized something else. He couldn't trust just anyone. Some neighbors might be too afraid, or worse, secretly working with the HOA. The question was no longer just, who can he trust? But how far is he willing to go to uncover the truth? As Mark locked his door, he knew the battle lines had been drawn. The neighborhood had turned into a battlefield, and he was no longer just a homeowner. He was a challenger to a system built on fear and silence, and the stakes were higher than he ever imagined. Mark sat in the cramped office of a local attorney, the walls lined with law books and framed certificates. Across from him, Sarah and the man from the secret meeting, Tom, listened intently as the lawyer laid out the grim reality. HOAs like Maplewood Heights are tough to fight, the attorney said, adjusting his glasses. Their rules are often recorded with the property deeds, making them legally binding. You're dealing with covenants, conditions, and restrictions that courts usually uphold. Mark felt a sinking weight settle in his chest. So, you're saying the HOA has the law on its side? Not entirely, the lawyer said. There are loopholes, procedural errors in how they enforce rules, and if you can prove they're acting outside their authority or engaging in unfair practices, you might have a case. Mark exchanged a glance with Sarah. This was going to be a long, grueling fight. The lawyer continued. First, we'll demand all HOA records, including meeting minutes, enforcement actions, and communications related to your case. Transparency is key. Mark nodded. I want to fight. But what about the costs? The lawyer smiled wryly. This is David versus Goliath territory. But if you win, it'll set a precedent for the entire neighborhood and maybe beyond. Outside the office, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over Maplewood Heights. Mark felt the weight of the battle ahead, but also a flicker of hope. Over the next few days, Mark and his new allies began collecting evidence. Emails from the HOA threatening fines, photos of patrols policing yards, and testimonies from neighbors who'd faced similar harassment. Each piece of information painted a picture of a powerful organization, more interested in control than community. But the HOA wasn't going to sit quietly. The very next week, Mark's mailbox was stuffed with notices, warnings of increased fines, demands to attend yet another hearing. A cold formal letter arrived from the HOA's attorney, threatening legal action for non-compliance. Mark's phone rang late one night. The caller ID showed unknown. He answered cautiously. A harsh voice whispered, "Back off, Reynolds. This isn't just a garden. It's about power. Don't make enemies you can't fight." Mark's hand trembled, but he didn't hang up. "I'm not backing down," he said firmly. The voice laughed. Then the line went dead. As the days passed, Mark felt the pressure mounting. Neighbors who had once greeted him warmly now avoided eye contact. Anonymous notes appeared, accusing him of stirring trouble and disrupting the peace. But Mark's resolve only grew. At the next HOA hearing, Mark arrived prepared. He presented his evidence calmly, calling out the inconsistencies in their enforcement and the hidden nature of the HOA's authority. The board members looked rattled. Linda, the president, tried to regain control with thinly veiled threats. "This board will continue to protect the neighborhood," she declared. Anyone who refuses to comply will face consequences. But Mark stood his ground. Outside the room, a small crowd of neighbors gathered, some whispering support, others shaking their heads in disapproval. Sarah approached Mark, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and hope. "This fight is bigger than any of us," she said, "but you've already started a ripple that could become a wave." That night, Mark reviewed the legal documents again, preparing for the long haul. This wasn't just about a garden or a house. It was about reclaiming freedom against a system designed to keep people silent and controlled. And Mark knew one thing for sure. In this fight between David and Goliath, he was no longer alone. Mark's fight against the HOA was gaining momentum, but the pressure was relentless. Fines piled up, neighbors whispered behind closed doors, and anonymous threats continued to haunt his every step. The line between friend and foe blurred with every passing day. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of collecting documents and organizing testimonies, Mark received an unexpected knock on his door. He wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the peephole, he saw a man in his late 40s, dressed in a worn jacket, looking nervous but determined. Mark opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" The man nodded. "I'm David, a former HOA board member. I heard about your fight. I want to help." Mark blinked, surprised. "Why now? Why come forward?" David glanced around, lowering his voice. "Because I've seen what they do behind closed doors. The intimidation, the backroom deals. I didn't agree with it, but I was scared to speak up." Mark invited him in, heart pounding with cautious hope. David sat down and pulled out a thick envelope stuffed with papers. "These are internal emails and meeting notes. They reveal how the board manipulates rules, targets homeowners who resist, and even pressures officials to ignore complaints." Mark sifted through the documents, disbelief turning to outrage. The papers detailed secret fines, coordinated harassment, campaigns, and an elaborate scheme to control property sales and raise fees without homeowner approval. "This is huge," Mark said quietly. "If this gets out, it could change everything." David nodded grimly. "That's why I'm risking a lot by giving you this. The board doesn't tolerate leaks." Mark felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was a battle against a corrupt system that thrived on silence. Over the next days, Mark, Sarah, Tom, and now David worked tirelessly, compiling evidence and preparing to expose the HOA's misconduct. But the board wasn't blind. One morning, Mark found his car's tires slashed. A menacing message was scrawled on the windshield. "Stop digging, or face worse." Fear gnawed at him, but so did resolve. Mark reported the vandalism to the police, who promised to investigate, but warned that proving HOA involvement would be difficult. Undeterred, Mark scheduled a meeting with a local news reporter interested in covering his story. When the cameras arrived, Mark laid out the evidence, secret emails, testimonies, and the story of a homeowner fighting for his rights. The report aired the next evening, stirring shock throughout Maplewood Heights. Neighbors who had been silent now whispered about the HOA's abuses, but the backlash was immediate. The HOA responded with a public statement, denying all accusations and accusing Mark of trying to destabilize the community. Linda, the board president, appeared on a local radio show, painting Mark as a troublemaker. Mark realized the fight had entered a new, more dangerous phase. It wasn't just about laws and rules anymore. It was a war for public opinion and his reputation. One night, as Mark prepared for what felt like a never-ending battle, David leaned in and said quietly, "There's one more thing you need to know." Mark looked up, curious and wary. "The HOA's reach goes beyond Maplewood Heights, David whispered. They have ties to developers planning to buy up properties and turn the neighborhood into something unrecognizable. This isn't just about control. It's about profit. Mark's jaw tightened. The stakes were higher than he ever imagined. With this new knowledge, Mark felt the fight wasn't just about his garden or his house anymore. It was about saving the community from being swallowed whole. And with an unexpected ally at his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. The tension in Maplewood Heights had reached a boiling point. After the news report aired, the neighborhood was split like never before. Some residents quietly thanked Mark for speaking out. Others eyed him with suspicion or outright hostility. The HOA, now under public scrutiny, lashed out with renewed fury. Mark sat in his living room, surrounded by piles of documents and emails, when his phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Mark, you need to come to the community center right now," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "Something's happened." Without hesitation, Mark grabbed his jacket and headed out. The streets were unusually quiet, shadows stretching long in the moonlight. When he arrived, the community center doors were locked. Sarah was waiting, her face pale. "They shut the center down," she whispered. "They're trying to stop us from meeting." Mark's heart sank. The HOA's influence was deeper than he'd imagined. Suddenly, headlights flooded the parking lot. A group of people, board members, and hired security approached, faces grim. Linda stepped forward. Her calm facade cracked. "Mark," she said sharply, "this neighborhood doesn't need a troublemaker stirring unrest. You and your allies are tearing the community apart." Mark squared his shoulders. "We're fighting for the truth. For all of us." Linda's eyes flashed cold. "You're risking everything. Your home, your reputation. This ends now." As she turned to leave, David stepped out from the shadows. "Not if we have anything to say about it." The confrontation was broken by the sudden arrival of local police officers responding to reports of a disturbance. The officers advised everyone to disperse peacefully. Mark left the scene with Sarah and David, but the threat lingered like a dark cloud. In the days that followed, Mark's phone buzzed, relentlessly with threatening messages. His social media was flooded with attacks, and some neighbors began openly siding with the HOA, wary of the conflict. Then came the bombshell. An anonymous whistleblower sent Mark a detailed dossier exposing not only the HOA's illegal dealings, but also collusion with a major real estate developer eager to convert Maplewood Heights into a commercial zone. The evidence was overwhelming. Secret contracts, off-the-record meetings, and hush-money payments. Mark shared the dossier with his attorney and local journalists. The story exploded in the media, drawing statewide attention. But the victory was bittersweet. In the fallout, Sarah's house was vandalized, and Tom received an eviction notice from his landlord. David faced threats at his workplace. The HOA was fighting dirty, but Mark's coalition was growing stronger. Then, during a heated town hall meeting, a surprise guest arrived. A state official, tasked with investigating the HOA's practices. The official announced a formal inquiry into the association's conduct. The room erupted in murmurs. Some cheered, others sat in stunned silence. Mark realized this was the turning point, the moment when the tide could finally turn against the HOA's oppressive regime. Yet as the inquiry began, Mark knew the battle was far from over. The HOA would fight tooth and nail to protect their interests, and in the shadows, old alliances were breaking, new enemies emerging. Mark steeled himself. This wasn't just a fight for his property anymore. It was a fight for justice, community, and the very soul of Maplewood Heights. The war was just beginning. The investigation into Maplewood Heights HOA had become the talk of the town, drawing attention far beyond the neighborhood's borders. Mark sat in the packed community hall, the air thick with anticipation. Residents from every street gathered, some hopeful, others fearful of what the future might hold. The state official, Ms. Reynolds, stood at the front, her tone firm but fair. After weeks of reviewing documents, interviewing residents, and scrutinizing the HOA's practices, it is clear there have been serious violations. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Effective immediately, the HOA board is suspended pending a full overhaul of governance. Furthermore, several board members face legal action for fraud, harassment, and misuse of funds. Mark felt a surge of relief and vindication. Years of intimidation and silence were finally unraveling. But as Ms. Reynolds continued, the room grew quieter, tense. The developer involved has withdrawn their plans following public backlash. However, changes must be made to ensure no future group holds unchecked power over this community. The victory felt sweet, but incomplete. After the meeting, Mark found himself surrounded by supporters, neighbors thanking him, journalists asking questions, even some who had once opposed him, now extending tentative hands of friendship. Yet, amidst the celebration, Mark's phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number flashed on the screen. "Congratulations! You've won the battle, but the war has just begun." A chill ran down his spine. Days later, as Mark walked his now peaceful street, he noticed subtle changes. New signage promoted a community advisory board, a group formed to replace the HOA, ostensibly to give residents more say. But rumors spread quickly. Some whispered the new board was quietly being influenced by the very developers and interests that had once controlled the HOA. The shadow of old power lingered, cleverly disguised. Mark's optimism was tempered by hard-earned caution. One evening, David stopped by with a worn notebook. The fight revealed a lot, but these notes show the old guard still holds sway behind the scenes, he said grimly. Mark nodded. "We have to stay vigilant. This community belongs to us, not to those who seek control." Together, they resolved to keep watching, organizing, and speaking out. The fight for Maplewood Heights was no longer just about a garden, a property, or even an HOA. It was about preserving the rights and voices of every homeowner. As the sun set behind the familiar houses, Mark felt a strange mix of exhaustion and hope. The battle had changed him. Tougher, wiser, more determined. He glanced at his garden, now peaceful and thriving. A small victory in a larger war, and while the final chapter of this story was still unwritten, Mark knew one truth above all: freedom was never given. It was taken, one brave stand at a time.